Hello, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. This is actually my third product marketing summit this year. I went to the one in New York and in San Francisco, and I'm here. And it's just been really inspiring to see such strong product marketing communities come together. I guess I've been talking to people here, and historically, there are a lot of marketing events, but there hasn't been a lot that are really focused on product marketing. And it kind of almost feels like therapy sometimes because you're learning from each other and trying to talk about problems you have and seeing that other people have the same problems. So it's just been great to be part of that. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about the topic today. But before I do, a little bit about me. Like you said, my name is Sarah. I lead product marketing for SurveyMonkey. Hopefully, most of you have heard of SurveyMonkey or are familiar with the product in some way, but if you're not, it's essentially a feedback platform that has existed for 20 years. So it's been a long time. They have offices around the world. Their headquarters is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I live. And in my attempt to make this introduction a little bit more interesting, I am going to give you two truths and a lie about me. I may or may not have had a pet jellyfish at some point. I may have traveled to every continent in the world, or there might be a video out there where I'm with Serena Williams. So I'll let you guess which one's true. If you want to find out, come ask me after the session. But back to our session. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of feedback and how you can leverage that to really create more effective messaging. Before I do that, just quick show of hands. How many of you are actually responsible for messaging and positioning in your role? Okay, almost all of you, which is what I would expect. If you've read the State of Product Marketing report that came out earlier this year, 92% of PMMs actually said that this was their top responsibility, as it should be. Messaging and positioning really is a fundamental area of product marketing. Truth is, messaging really isn't that hard. And it's not easy, but it's not hard. The challenge really there is moving past your existing narratives. Most companies sort of live and breathe their products and end up creating these echo chambers of language and of ideas and of terminology that probably makes a lot of sense to people internally and the people working there, but it doesn't often translate to the outside world. And for us as PMMs, it can also be really hard to step outside of what we know and speak the language of the people that we're trying to influence. So the key here is to really make room for outside perspectives. Because if you want to tell a story that's going to resonate, you want to make sure you're listening to the people that you're talking to. Before we do that, though, it's important to sort of define what effective messaging really means. In my experience, there are three key attributes to effective messaging. Effective messaging should be relevant. Relevant to your audience, relevant to their needs, relevant to the time, the place, and the channel that you're delivering it in. It also needs to be authentic. It should sound human. You don't want a lot of jargon or buzzwords. You also want to make sure that it's simple and it's clear and that anybody can understand it. And lastly, you can have the most compelling messaging in the world, but if it is not credible, no one's going to care. So your messaging really should be based in facts, it should be accurate, and it should have some sort of evidence to back it up. And so how do you get to a point where your messaging is effective and has all of these three key attributes? Earlier this year, my team actually went through a process of overhauling our entire messaging strategy. And it was a pretty big effort. I will talk to you a little bit about why we did it, how we did it, and then talk about some of the learnings we gained along the way. So most people don't realize it, but SurveyMonkey has been around for 20 years, which is ancient in the tech world. Over time, as you can see, we started off as this simple, easy-to-use tool that was just meant to do surveys. Over time, the company has built a lot of different products. They've also acquired a lot of different companies. Just this year alone, we acquired 2 companies. We also went public last year. Today, we actually have 8 distinct product lines. 8. That's a lot for the company our size. That causes a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to messaging. First of all, until last year, we didn't even have a single PMM team. Because of all those acquisitions and the different products we built, we had siloed teams working on messaging. So there was nobody at the company that was sort of stitching all of the stories together to talk about our company as a whole. So we had a lot of inconsistencies. We had no cohesive story. Also, being a very product-centric org, all of our messaging was really based on features and functionality and not so much focused on the customer benefits, which is a problem. And then if you go back and look at our evolution, as I said, we started off as a very B2C, easy-to-use product, but over time, the products that we acquired were very much B2B solutions. Our goal was to really play in the enterprise space. So our product has evolved, but our market perception hadn't. Most people we talk to know of SurveyMonkey because we have great brand equity, but they still think of SurveyMonkey as that easy-to-use tool that they used back in college. That's the perception out there. And so all of this together caused a lot of inconsistent messages out in the market, and we didn't really have a single story we were telling. And so my team's goal or challenge was to really take all of this history and this mess and come up with some sort of a unified messaging strategy that incorporated all of those three elements of being relevant, of being authentic, and of being credible. But how do you even get started? I come from a very MIS background, so for me, anytime I tackle a project, it needs to have some sort of structure. So we started by defining a process. Defining a process is important because, again, the project of this scope is not going to be something that you do with a few people on your team. This is definitely going to involve a lot of cross-functional partners. And so we came up with this 7-step process, and I'm going to walk you through each of these steps in a little more detail. So the first step in this project was to really scope out what we were going to do. The scoping in this case was really the messaging framework. Your messaging framework really is about prioritizing the different layers of messaging that you are going to create. So starting with the one in the middle, which is the corporate messaging, this can be called different things at different companies. This can be your brand message, this can be your core message. For us, we call it the corporate messaging, but almost every company should have some form of this, and this is where you start. This is at the highest level, and this is product agnostic. And depending on how big or small you are, you can then start to layer this and add on different elements. For us, for example, some of the questions that we asked were, as you saw, our portfolio is pretty complex. We have, for example, different buyers that we sell to. We sell to marketers, we sell to HR, to IT, to market researchers. There's just so many personas we sell to. It doesn't make sense to just have one layer of messaging that talks about the company as a whole, because when we go and talk to marketers, we likely need something that's a little bit tailored to them. In addition to that, by product, there are some sort of layers that you need that are very technical for each of the products. And then let's say you have different verticals that you sell to. EDU is, for example, one of our top verticals. So we really want to make sure that we're also delivering messaging that is tailored to specific verticals that we sell into. So our framework sort of became this multi-layered framework. For most of you, that might not be the case. The goal at this point really is to prioritize, because it's unrealistic for you to think that you're just going to roll out all of this at once. And so you want to do this in phases. And for us, the first phase that we focused on was the corporate messaging. Once you have your framework, the next step is to really do your research. And there's a couple of things that you can do here. The first and foremost is to really acknowledge what you already have. Because I'm sure there's like a lot of content that you've already built. Whether it is your website or sales collateral or strategy decks or board memos, what have you. Gather as much content as you can, because the goal with that is to leverage the best bits and pieces you have. Why reinvent the wheel? The next thing you want to do is competitive research. This is something you're likely doing on a regular basis, but for the purposes of this exercise, you're going to take a very specific look at your competitors. And this is more from a lens of positioning. What we did is we created a grid where we talked about all of our competitors and write down their positioning statements, and then had a section for us so that when we develop our new messaging, we could put that into the grid and make sure that we weren't all saying the same thing. Next, you want to get feedback from a variety of sources. And you want to do a mix of both internal and external sources. And so a couple of things you can do here, and you also want to make sure that you're gathering both qualitative and quantitative data. A couple of things that you can do is, one, just start by interviewing your internal leadership. Talk to them and try to understand the value they see in your products. You can also talk to your sales teams or your customer success teams. Those are the people out there that are talking to customers every day. That intel is very, very valuable. The other thing that we did is, if you have access to analysts or industry experts, those are also great places to go and really understand the market landscape. But also, analysts can give you really honest opinions about where you stand in the landscape and what your perception of your product is against your competitors. And that can really be useful in sort of setting the stage. And last but not least, leverage your existing customers. Do focus groups, do surveys, do some sort of interviews. They chose you for a certain. So try to understand why they chose you. How are they using your products? Why are they using your products? What is the benefit that they're seeing from them? And what problems are you solving for them? After you've gathered all of this information, the next step in the process is for you to start drafting your messaging. And this can vary for everyone. And it can be more of the fluffy part of the process, because you have all of this concept and all of this data, and now you're supposed to put it down in writing. Deliverables here can be different for every company. And going back to your messaging framework, each layer in your messaging framework can have different deliverables. These are some of the typical ones that we created. And for example, when we built our corporate messaging, we delivered all of these materials minus the buyer personas. Those ones only came to play when we were working on messaging by buyers. Just going through these quickly, the unique value proposition really is at the heart of your messaging. The competitive positioning, like I said, will really allow you to make sure that you're differentiated. The buyer personas will dive into who your buyers are, what they want, how to reach them, and things like that. Your elevator pitch really is the more conversational way of reaching and talking to your customers about your company's story. And then proof points I'll get to in a little more detail, but these are just the supporting points or data that you are going to use to support as evidence for all the claims that you make. And so talking about the unique value proposition, which I said is at the heart of your messaging, if you Google unique value proposition, you likely will see millions and millions of templates out there. There's also the very traditional positioning statements that most of you have probably seen in like marketing one-on-one. At the end of the day, they all have similar elements. And so some of the things that you really want to focus on is, first, who is your audience? Who are you speaking to? Is it your buyers? Is it your users? Who are they? What is their challenge? What do they need? What is your solution or your offering? Have a way of describing your offering in a really simple way. And the most important part of the value proposition, at least in my eyes, is this part which we call the solution benefit statement. It's about how you solve their problems. And there's different ways to write this. We decided to frame it in a way of, we help you do X so you can do Y. It kind of simplifies it, and it was an easy way for us to just be consistent in how we talk about benefit and value. And last but not least, you're going to need to have a section on how you are unique, or what you call core differentiators. I typically like to say we need 3 to 5 maximum, because after that, it just kind of becomes a laundry list of things. And so you really want to be thoughtful and prioritize what truly makes you unique, because it's easy to just, working at a company, I love my product. I can easily come up with 10 things that I think are great about us. But you want to make sure that these are actually differentiated in some way, and that your customers will care about them. So maximum 5, 3 is ideal. At this point, I also want to mention that this is still in the early stages of your development. The goal is not to get it perfect. You're not writing copy for a campaign. All of this is internal messaging, and it's a guiding sort of document for the rest of your company to use and then create things like campaign messaging, or take this and use to make website copy. So the goal is not to get it perfect in this phase, because as you'll see next, you need to have a few different variations of this as well, because this is not the point where you are able to make decisions on what works and what doesn't. We haven't tested it yet. So have a few different variations, because the next step in the process is testing. And testing is really, really important. One, because the data you're going to get from testing is going to help you make the right decisions. It's going to help you narrow down even things like language and words that you use, benefits over solutions or whatever. Like, you can have two different words that say the same thing. Which one works the best, right? This is the time where you start to refine that messaging. Testing can be done in many different ways. Testing can also take a lot of time. So the best thing to do is to create a test plan to begin with, and be very thoughtful about the channels that you test in, but also the kind of messaging that you test in each channel. To give you an idea, if you're testing something in SEM, that's very top of the funnel. You want something that's a high level messaging. Whereas if you're testing something in product, it probably needs to be a little bit more specific, because it's really in the product itself where people are engaged. So figure out what that mix is, figure out what you're trying to get out of it, use multiple marketing channels to test it. Some of the ones that we used, SEM, we started with SEM actually, because that is one of the quickest things to run. And you can see results fairly quickly against controls. We also tested a few areas on our website, just sort of low-hanging fruits where we weren't messing up with the SEO or anything. Email is another great way of testing, A/B testing some copy or A/B testing subject lines. You can use social media and display. In product, as I talked about, because we are also a B2B company, we wanted to test it through the sales channel as well. So we worked with our outbound BDR team to implement some of this messaging into our outreach sequences. So all of those are really focused on marketing and sales channel. My favorite part of this process really was the market research. Market research can be very, very useful. It can also be daunting sometimes if you don't know how to do it well. But the results that you get from market research are so valuable in so many different ways. It's hard for me to go into a lot of detail, because that in itself could be a whole session. But the way that we did market testing was through this thing called concept test. And if you are not familiar with the concept test, in the most simple form, it's basically you introduce a bunch of different concepts or ideas in front of people, and then you have a set of questions that you ask around believability, uniqueness, trustworthiness, or which ones they would select. And then it goes through a bunch of different logic and methodology to narrow down which of those concepts wins. And so this is just a quick snapshot of some of the questions that we asked in our concept test. And the way we created our concept test was that we took our value proposition and all the sections within it. So let's say customer challenge. There's 5 different customer challenges that we thought are challenges for our customers, right? Let's say we're selling to HR and we think these are the 5 things that are really problems for them in the world. But we need them to tell us which one's the most important. Those are the questions that we asked to narrow it down. Concept testing is not super simple. I'm lucky because I work for a company where we actually have the tools and the in-house expertise to be able to do this on a regular basis. With that said, however, I do think it's very valuable. We have a lot of templates and ultimate guides. So if anyone is interested in learning more about it, I'm happy to share it. So just reach out to me. So at this point, you've done a bunch of testing. You've refined your messaging based on all the data that you've seen. The next step in the process is really adding that credibility. If you go back to the 3 key attributes of effective messaging, one of them is credibility. There are many different flavors of data points that you can use. Some of those I've listed here. Sometimes you can just look at your existing company stats and leverage those, like stats on number of customers or number of users. You can also survey your current customers and get aggregated data to tell a story or to illustrate a certain point that you're trying to make. And then always, customer quotes and stories are always a great way of adding credibility to your story. To give you an example, up there we have 3 different claims that we make in our messaging. And then these are 3 very different ways of adding credibility to that claim. And I'm not gonna read all of this, but this is just to illustrate how you can mix and match the different types of data points. In the first one, we talk about us being a market-leading platform, and we use a lot of company stats to illustrate that point. In the next one, we're talking about the usage of the product. One of the claims we make is that we're intuitive and easy to use. And so we ran a bunch of different surveys with existing customers who actually use the products and asked them questions about usability and ease of use, training required, and all that. Aggregated that data and came up with these stats, and we have pages and pages of stats like this that we use in marketing all the time. And then the last one is an example of using a customer quote or a story where we talk about the flexibility of our platform. What better way to illustrate that by a customer telling us that? So now that you have your messaging completed, you have the data points, everything's kind of packaged together. The next step is really the rollout. The rollout can be really complex and really long, or it can be really simple. It really depends on your org structure, and it depends on how big your company is. A couple of things that we're actually in the process right now because we are a big company. There are a lot of players that we need to work with. And also, like I mentioned earlier, this year we acquired 2 new companies, so we kind of had to put things on hold and then start to incorporate that into the mix as well. But for the most part, I think of the rollout in 2 different phases. There is the internal rollout. Before you roll it out to the rest of the world, you want to make sure that internally everyone's speaking the same language. And so a couple of things you can do there is 1, have some sort of a single source of truth. For us, it's our internal wiki page. Here is where you want to put all of your materials. You can even put results of your testing. Some people like to dive into the data to understand how you came to certain conclusions, and it's interesting for people. So you can just put your results of your data and the key insights up there. You can put all of your documentation up there, which is like your final messaging work, your value propositions, elevator pitch, buyer personas, whatever. The other thing that we like to do is do a roadshow with projects like this. And what that involves is that typically we would get 30 minutes on different team meetings and then go through and do a presentation of the entire process and of the key insights and walk them through what we did, what we learned, how we did it, and here's the result. And what that does is that you're not just launching this one big thing to the entire company all at once without making sure that different people that need to be bought in aren't seeing it for the first time. You also, in doing it this way, you give people an option to give you feedback along the way. Most people care about messaging, and most people will have opinions. And so this way, when you're walking them through and showing them data, you're bringing them along the journey and making them feel like they're part of the process. And in the delivery of the rollout, you can also create multiple assets. I like to think of this as an internal campaign, really. So you're going to create different types of assets and materials and launch it in different ways. You can even make it into an event. So every year, in the beginning of the year, we have our sales kickoff, which is a pretty big event for the company. And so what we've decided to do is treat this like a drip campaign. We're kind of in this phase where we have a few other materials going out in December and through January. And then at the end of January, at the sales kickoff, we'll kind of do like a big thing and sort of a reveal with this. What it does is it also makes it more fun. And people are counting down towards it. So it just creates this sort of excitement in the company. And really the goal here is to repeat it. You can't just roll it out once and expect people to absorb it. You have to do it in different ways and in different channels so that they start to absorb it over time. And then for the external rollout, this is the part where you really need your channel partners and you need their help. So going back, if you have brought them along the journey, you will have a much easier time in getting them to take ownership of it. So any sort of campaigns that you need to launch or there's two parts to this. There's looking back and seeing if there's things that need to be updated. You will then need to prioritize, if at all, something needs to be updated, like your website or old materials. And then it's the future forward projects. Anything that you now create should incorporate the new messaging into it. So those are some of the things you need to take care of when you're thinking of the external rollout. Last step in the process, everything's done. The messaging is out there. It's beautiful. It's perfect. Everyone loves it. How do you measure the impact? It's hard. Most product marketing projects, actually, I find are hard to measure because there aren't always specific KPIs. And especially with messaging, I don't know of a KPI that you can use to measure messaging specifically. So this is where you get creative. What we did is we looked at what our goals were and then tied some metrics to those goals to see the impact through that. One of our goals was to improve sales confidence. We wanted them to be able to articulate the value of our products, because that was a complaint we heard all the time. It was always like, I don't know how to sell value. I don't know how to sell value. And so this whole project was meant to be able to enable them to sell value. So we, along with our sales enablement team, ran a survey before we launched this project, asking them about their confidence and how they feel in selling the value of our products. And then we're going to be rolling this out in January. Our goal is to do the same survey every quarter and see some sort of a trending data and hopefully see the sales confidence improving. And that can be a measure of success for the product marketing team. The other thing that I mentioned earlier on as a challenge was brand perception. And that's something that we regularly monitor. We have a team that does brand tracking. So for us, it's just leveraging that. And then at the point where we do a customer launch, trying to see if there's been a shift in brand perception as a result. There's other things you can look at. Campaign performance, obviously, is one of them. One other interesting thing that you can do is go back to the analysts that you spoke to at the beginning of the process. They've seen the pre-messaging part. They know the challenges that you were facing. Go to them with the new messaging and see how they react to it. That can also be another measure of success. So those were the 7 steps of our process. Some of the things that we learned along the way, and like I said, we're still kind of in the process yet, so it's not over for us. But what helped us is, one, it's important to define your core team and key stakeholders at the very beginning of the process and make sure that the roles and responsibilities are very clear because there can often be overlap. It's also important to establish timelines and milestones with your cross-functional partners because this will impact them down the line. So you want to make sure you're aligned on that. Consistent communication is key. Again, part of this project is not just doing the project, but actually talking about it in the company, bringing people along and getting them to buy in. At bigger companies, that's an even bigger challenge because most of the times if you do something really cool and you just kind of tell them you're going to do it and then show up with this beautiful package, nobody will care because they want to know how you did it and why weren't they involved. So consistent communication really helps you to get everyone to get excited and come along with you. And then that goes along with the same point of getting buy-in. The best way to get buy-in is through data. Data doesn't lie. So if you've done all this testing, if you've done all this market research, you have all of that data in the back of your pocket because oftentimes what's happened is, there's going to be certain leaders that are very passionate about certain language or about certain things, and they don't want to let go of it. But if you've done some testing and you can show them the customers actually don't react to those well, these are the words that actually work better, they can't refute that. And so final thoughts, key takeaways really. Effective messaging is relevant, it's authentic, and it's credible. And the only way that it can be is by you infusing the voice of your customer into every part of your process. And it's really, really important to use a data-driven approach, not just to make the decisions you need to make, but like I said, also to get consensus and buy-in from internal stakeholders. That's all I have. Thank you. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
I have one question about the KPI element and measuring the success of your efforts. And one of the metrics that you had up there was sales confidence.
Yes.
So this is it's an interesting one for me because when we rolled out a sales and product enablement program, we're like, well, sure, we want them to sell more, but that's really a sales thing. So we think, how do we measure the sales confidence and prove that that's really a KPI? Because they might feel more confident today because it's just launched. But then once the honeymoon phase is over, does that go away and then the sales affected by that?
Yeah.
So how were you able to convince everyone that that should or should not be a KPI to actually measure?
You first have to get the leadership aligned on that, like the sales leadership especially. At least that's how it works in our company. If they get bought in and, if that's something that they are happy to measure, then they will make sure that it's something that the sales team participates in and that's something that's looked at every quarter. We've had some issues with enablement, honestly, I'll be honest, in the company where we've scaled our sales team so much in the last year and that we haven't been able to keep up with the enablement piece of it. So there's a lot of complaints around, I don't know how to talk about this. I don't know how to sell this, right? So we've heard a lot of those complaints, and going back to leadership, we've come up with a few plans, including one being this. And they were actually really happy to use this because one, it uses our own product. So there's that piece to it. But also, I think there is no other way to measure it. At least I haven't come across it. So confidence to me is more important than their ability to sell the product, because a part of it is just the work that they do that we don't control. But confidence can be improved if we're doing our job well. If we give them the right materials and if we're telling them the right story and they're learning it, confidence should improve. At least that's the theory. So we haven't gone through the process enough to see the trend yet. We've only done 2. So over time, I'm hopeful that you see some sort of a trend and that it's helpful. But again, going back to your point, it's really important to not just work with the sales team on it or the sales enablement or whatever teams you have. Get the leadership to agree first, and then they'll be the ones who roll it out.
Yeah, it's a massive project, especially for the whole portfolio and brand messaging levels. I'm wondering, in terms of testing, how do you know when you're done? Is it the project timeline moving forward, or are you looking for other key insights?
Yeah.
How do you know when you're ready to launch?
So that's part of building a testing plan. There are certain tests like SEM ads that kind of give you results fairly quickly, right? So, or in product. So those tests you run first, and then start the tests that are probably going to take a few months in the background. All this to say, when I say messaging is done, it's never done, right? You're going to keep testing it over time. Some tests will run for months, and those will just give you small tweaks. At this point, the test that you run in an email is not going to drastically change your value proposition, right? It might just give you tweaks on like using this word versus this. So it will evolve over time. But when you build your test plan, focus on the ones that can give you some quick answers. Like market research, for example, is one that is massive, is at scale, and can be done within a week. So start with that. Then start with a few marketing channels, and then roll out the rest in phases. That's how I would do it.
I think I saw one more hand. Did I not?
Yeah.
Do you have any other tips on how to socialize that message internally amongst the various stakeholders?
Yes. Our focus has been on sales a lot because that's where most of the problems were that we were trying to solve. So we focused on rolling it out to them first before we even rolled it out to the rest of the org. The way we did that, and I can talk about this in so much more detail, but you can't just give sales documentation and value prop. they're not going to get it. Like, what is this? How do I use it? You have to make it actionable for them. So the way we did it is that we created this documentation for ourselves and knew the value prop and all of that, and more for marketing, they get it. For sales, what we did is actually took this messaging and then took a whole quarter and worked on all of our sales pitches, completely redid them based on the messaging and the learning. With the new sales pitches, we also created talk tracks, because just giving them sales pitches was not useful. It's like, I don't know how to talk to this slide. So we actually wrote talk tracks for each of them. On top of that, we found a few different champions within the sales org that everyone looks up to and got them to narrate that, like a very short version of that, and kind of tell that story on video. We packaged all of that and then launched it to the entire sales team at one of our sales all hands. But that's not enough. You have to put it somewhere where they can reach it. So we actually use HighSpot as our CMS platform where they can, play around with things. You also have analytics, so you can see who's looking at it and who's not. And then we held workshops over time. So every other week, we had workshops for each of our personas. That's kind of how they go to market. And so we had, let's say, 5 different sales motions. So we would do the workshop for the IT buyer in 1 week and really dive deep, talk about the messaging, what we learned, show them the data a little bit as well, because it's exciting to them and they know we're not just coming up with it. And then go through the pitch and talk to them about how to talk to customers. And that's really helped.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple little housekeeping notes before we go to coffee, which is still on time.